Highfield House in Southampton is being used to house asylum seekers, and has sparked anger amongst locals.
It started as a protest against migrant housing, but within hours, the streets of London turned into a war zone. Witnesses claim the Hells Angels went hotel to hotel, clearing out entire shelters. But what really triggered this violent rampage, and why are officials staying silent about what they found inside? The powder keg, how Britain's asylum hotels became ground zero. It's a typical Saturday afternoon in Southampton, and hundreds of residents are gathering outside the Highfield House Hotel. They're waving Union Jacks and St. George's crosses, chanting about taking back their streets. Just a stone's throw away, counter-protesters are assembling, ready for confrontation. The police are sandwiched between them, horses at the ready, riot gear gleaming in the autumn sun. This isn't an isolated incident. It's become the new normal across the United Kingdom, where over 210 hotels are currently housing approximately 32,000 asylum seekers as of mid-2025. And the British public? Well, they've had enough. But before we dive into the explosive protests that have rocked cities from Southampton to Rotherham, from London's Canary Wharf to the quiet suburbs of Epping, we need to understand how we got here. Because this story isn't just about hotels or immigration, it's about a system that's been crumbling for years, finally reaching its catastrophic breaking point. Let's rewind to the early 2020s. The COVID-19 pandemic had just swept across the globe, and the United Kingdom was dealing with an unprecedented surge in asylum applications. Channel crossings via small boats were skyrocketing, with over 45,000 arrivals in 2022 alone. The government's asylum processing system, already creaking under the weight of bureaucratic delays and policy paralysis, simply couldn't keep up. The backlog grew and grew and grew some more. By 2023, over 100,000 undecided asylum cases were clogging the system. People were waiting months, sometimes years, for their cases to be heard. And during that time, they needed somewhere to live. Enter the hotels. What started as a temporary, emergency solution quickly became the government's primary accommodation strategy. The Home Office began contracting private providers like Serco and Clearsprings to manage operations, converting hotels from tourist destinations into asylum housing almost overnight. And the cost? Absolutely staggering. In 2023, the daily cost of hotel accommodation reached approximately $8 million. Yes, you read that correctly. £8 million per day. That equated to an annual spend of around $3 billion for 2023-2024, housing about 56,000 individuals in roughly 400 hotels across the country. To put this in perspective, the per-person nightly cost averaged between $119 and $158, including room, meals, and support services. Compare that to dispersal housing, shared accommodations in communities, which cost about $20 or $23 per person per night. The hotel option was literally 6 times more expensive. But here's where it gets even more shocking. The National Audit Office reported in May 2025 that the 10-year contracts for asylum accommodation, originally budgeted at $4.5 billion, have ballooned to $15.3 billion. That's more than triple the original estimate, representing what MPs have called a failed, chaotic, and expensive system. The Home Affairs Committee's scathing October 2025 report didn't pull any punches. They labeled the entire operation as wasteful, attributing billions in squandered funds to mismanagement, including unrecovered excess profits from providers and zero fines for poor performance.
Here in the UK, the Home Office has been accused of wasting billions of pounds on hotels for asylum seekers over the last 6 years.
Now, to be fair, the Labour government that took office in July 2024 has made some progress. They've closed 150 hotel sites, reducing daily costs significantly. Annual hotel spending dropped to $2.1 billion, a 30% reduction from the prior year, with monthly averages sitting at $108 million. They've also pledged to phase out hotels entirely by the next election, which is likely in 2029. But here's the thing, the damage was already done. The hotels weren't just a financial burden, they became flashpoints for community tensions. Imagine you're a resident in a quiet English town. You wake up one morning to find that the hotel down your street, maybe the same one where you celebrated your daughter's wedding reception last summer, has been converted into asylum accommodation overnight. Nobody asked your opinion. Nobody consulted the community. The government simply announced it as a fait accompli, and then the problems started. Locals began reporting increases in antisocial behavior. Some areas saw upticks in crime statistics, though it's important to note that research suggests no disproportionate crime increase directly linked to asylum seekers. But perception perception became reality for many. Residents, fueled by social media reports and personal experiences. Take the Thistle City Barbican Hotel in London, for example. Since November 2021, it's been housing asylum seekers under a 10 million plabas annual government contract. Local reports paint a disturbing picture: over 90 offenses by 41 residents in just 1 year, including cases of rape, arson, and theft. The Sun newspaper's investigation found that police had been called to the hotel over 150 times. Or consider what happened in Southampton, where residents claim there's been an increase in antisocial behavior, sexual assaults, and fear in the area since the Highfield House Hotel began housing asylum seekers. But here's where the narrative gets complicated, and where we need to be very careful about separating facts from fears, legitimate concerns from manufactured outrage. Because while some residents had genuine grievances about their communities changing rapidly without consultation, others were being manipulated by far-right groups who saw an opportunity to advance their agenda. Organizations like the Homeland Party, Patriotic Alternative, and Britain First began organizing protests through Facebook groups with names like Epping Says No, Weathersfield Says No, and Nuneaton Says No. These groups used legitimate community concerns as a Trojan horse for spreading anti-immigration rhetoric and, in some cases, outright racism. The protests that followed would reveal a deeply divided nation, where the lines between patriotism and prejudice, between protecting community and promoting hatred, became increasingly blurred. And then came the violence. The explosion, when protests turned deadly. If you want to understand how quickly things can spiral out of control, look no further than what happened in Rotherham on August 4th, 2024. It was supposed to be a protest. By the end of the day, it had become an attempted massacre. Let's set the scene. The Holiday Inn Express in Manvers, Rotherham, was housing around 250 asylum seekers. The hotel had become a target for far-right agitators, following the spread of misinformation about a stabbing in Southport that had killed 3 children. False online claims suggested the attacker was a Muslim asylum seeker, when in reality he was a 17-year-old British-born individual of Rwandan heritage. But facts didn't matter to the mob that assembled that day. An estimated 700 to 750 far-right demonstrators, many masked and draped in flags, gathered outside the hotel around midday. What started as chants of "get them out" and "we want our country back" quickly escalated into something far more sinister.
They fight each other?
Yeah, like fighting each other down there, and then like trying to get in the windows of there. And there are only old people over there.
The mob began hurling bricks, bottles, chairs, tree branches, fireworks, and fire extinguishers at police lines. They smashed hotel windows. They stormed the building. And then, in what police later described as one of the most terrifying moments, they attempted to set the building on fire with people inside. The rioters ignited a stairwell inside the hotel and pushed flaming bins filled with debris against the exterior. The 250 asylum seekers trapped inside, mostly young men and teenagers, feared for their lives. Some later described hearing the mob's chants and believing they were going to die that day. Police helicopters circled overhead. Officers, using riot shields and police dogs, held the line for over 12 hours before regaining control. The toll? 53 officers wounded, including one who was rendered unconscious by a brick to the head and required hospitalization. Police dogs and horses were also injured in the melee. Miraculously, no asylum seekers were physically harmed, but the psychological trauma was immense. They were evacuated overnight and relocated some hundreds of miles away. The hotel sat empty for months afterward. The same day, a similar scene unfolded at the Holiday Inn in Tamworth, Staffordshire. A mob of over 300 far-right protesters set fire to the hotel housing refugees, smashing windows and throwing projectiles. One officer was injured. The incident was condemned by Prime Minister Keir Starmer as far-right thuggery and by activists as outright fascism. These weren't isolated incidents. They were part of what became known as the 2024 United Kingdom riots, the worst civil unrest England had seen in 13 years. From late July to early August 2024, violence erupted across multiple cities, with hotels housing asylum seekers serving as as primary targets. The statistics are sobering. Over 1,940 arrests by July 2022, with more than 1,100 charges, more than 361 officers injured nationwide, damaged, and a clear message sent. Britain was at a breaking point. The judicial response was swift and severe. Courts operated extended hours to process cases, handing down sentences that averaged around 2 years, though arson convictions carried much heavier penalties. Thomas Burley, 27, was jailed for 9 years for arson with intent to endanger life after stoking a fire near the Rotherham Hotel's entrance. Levi Fishlock received a matching 9-year term for similar actions. Matthew Crossland, 32, got 9 years for helping stoke the fire. Morgan Healy, 26, received 8 years for throwing a fire extinguisher and attempting to ignite curtains. But perhaps the most tragic case was that of Peter Lynch, 61, a prominent figure at the Rotherham riot who was sentenced to 2 years and 8 months for violent disorder. He died by suicide in prison in October 2024, his death becoming a rallying cry for far-right groups claiming persecution.
Voters have given the UK government an ultimatum, and this is the response they got. Whoa! The police are just running people over.
Fast forward to 2025, and the protests haven't stopped. They've evolved. Unlike the chaotic violence of August 2024, the 2025 demonstrations have been more organized, more calculated, and in many cases, more peaceful, though still highly charged and occasionally explosive. Take the situation in Epping, Essex. The Bell Hotel became a flashpoint after an asylum seeker was charged with sexual assault. This triggered repeated protests, some drawing up to 2,000 people. On July 17, 2025, clashes with counter-protesters left 8 officers injured and police vehicles vandalized. On July 20th, over 1,000 attendees threw smoke flares and bottles, resulting in 1 officer being hospitalized. The pattern repeated across the country. In Canary Wharf, protests at the Britannia Hotel saw officers punched and 4 arrests for assaults and disorder. A September incident involved a woman forcing entry with a meat cleaver. At the Crown Plaza near Heathrow in August 2025, 500 protesters marched, with masked men damaging fences and attempting rear entry. 5 arrests followed for disorder, and 2 officers were injured. And then there was Southampton, which brings us back to where we started.
Whoa, the horses ran over! The horses ran over! What on earth? Whoa, the horse is kicking off! Did you see that? I have never seen that guy's a horse just ran over!
On October 26, 2025, rival marches converged on Southampton. 400 anti-immigration protesters, waving flags and banners reading "Deport illegal invaders," faced off against 600 anti-racism counter-protesters. Police blocked roads, keeping groups 50 meters apart with vans and horses. The protest was largely peaceful until it wasn't. A bottle was thrown from a bridge overlooking the march. In the chaos that followed, protesters surged toward the bridge. Police horses charged to control the crowd, and in the melee, elderly women, including protest stewards, were trampled.
Daddy's been sprayed. You okay, madam? You okay? You right, right?
The horse knocked me over.
Right, yeah. Where's your hurt? Your leg?
The incident crystallized everything wrong with how these protests were being handled, and how quickly even peaceful demonstrations could turn violent when tensions ran this high. But here's what most people don't understand. These protests weren't just about hotels or even immigration policy. They were symptoms of something much deeper, a fundamental crisis in British identity, governance, and social cohesion. The reckoning. What really drove the protests? Now, let's address the elephant in the room. Were these protests driven by legitimate concerns about immigration policy, or were they simply racist mobs incited by far-right extremists? The uncomfortable truth. Both. Let's start with the legitimate grievances, because they absolutely exist. When I spoke to protesters in Southampton and reviewed countless interviews, a pattern emerged. Many participants weren't career activists or ideologues. They were ordinary residents who felt their communities had been fundamentally altered without their consent or consultation.
This hotel right in front of us.
Yeah, it's disgusting, mate.
We've got to get him out, didn't we? We want to get him out.
Have you had any trouble in this hotel since the residents have been here?
No, we're from Pompey, mate, we are. We come
Okay,
up
so
from
you-
Pompey to support.
Take the security guard I interviewed who worked at Southampton's Highfield House Hotel. He told me an astonishing story. In May 2022, he and his entire 27-man security team were fired with just 6 days' notice, so the hotel could hire migrant workers to provide security for the asylum seekers. Since then, he hasn't been able to find work, effectively blacklisted from the security industry.
I used to run the security for the hotel.
Really?
Back in May 2022.
Right.
We were asked to be given 6 days' notice.
Oh, and they fired you?
Yeah, the whole 27-man team.
Is that man's anger justified? Absolutely. Is it about racism? No, it's about losing his livelihood. Or consider the residents in Epping, who point out that their area saw 265 violent sexual assaults in August, alone in a 3-mile radius surrounding the asylum hotel. They're also quick to note that within that radius are 8 primary schools and 2 university campuses.
As far as I'm concerned, it would like to be, well, in Southampton alone, that area has caused 265 in August alone. 265 violent sexual assaults surrounding that hotel.
Right.
All the information's on the Portsmouth Police website.
Are these concerns legitimate? Yes. Should they be dismissed as racism? Absolutely not. But here's where it gets complicated. Research suggests that asylum seekers do not commit crimes at disproportionately higher rates than the general population. In fact, many of these reported increases in crime may be more about perception than reality, fueled by social media amplification and selective media coverage. This brings us to the other side of the equation, the far-right manipulation of genuine concerns. Organizations like the Homeland Party have been central in organizing protests, creating Facebook groups to rally demonstrations. Key figures include individuals linked to neo-Nazi or white nationalist backgrounds. When I encountered the white Vanguard group at the Southampton protest, their spokesman was remarkably candid about their agenda.
Yeah, last time we spoke, you said you're a National Socialist group, you're pushing for basically a pure white society. Is that still the stance?
Absolutely, you can't change an ideology.
So what do you say to people that claim you're a neo-Nazi group?
The National Socialism, it's in the title.
These groups are explicitly advocating for racial purity. They openly embrace the term National Socialism, a euphemism for Nazism, and they're using community frustrations about asylum hotels as recruitment tools. The Southampton protest organizer told me something chilling about their strategy.
When are the people going to stop caring about being called words? When? Because to me, preserving our people, preserving our culture, preserving our identity is the highest law of nature.
But wanting a pure white society is genuinely racist. Would you not argue that?
Racism is self-preservation.
This is the disturbing reality. Far-right groups are deliberately conflating legitimate policy concerns with white nationalist ideology, making it nearly impossible to have nuanced conversations about immigration without someone being labeled either a racist or a traitor. Anti-fascist monitors like Stand Up to Racism have documented this pattern repeatedly. They note that while not all protesters share extremist views, the presence of organized far-right elements at nearly every major demonstration has poisoned the discourse. And then there's the role of misinformation. Remember how the 2024 riots started with false claims about the Southport attacker being a Muslim asylum seeker. This misinformation spread like wildfire through social media, particularly on platforms like X, formerly Twitter, and Telegram channels operated by far-right groups. A May 2025 police inspectorate report found that rioters were mostly locals from deprived areas, influenced by online disaffection rather than deep ideology. In other words, people weren't born hateful, they were radicalized by what they consumed online. There's even evidence of Russian-linked social media accounts encouraging disorder related to protests like the one in Epping. Foreign actors are actively trying to destabilize British society by amplifying these divisions. But let's be clear about something. The government bears responsibility too. The Home Office's mismanagement of asylum contracts, the lack of community consultation when placing hotels, the failure to process claims efficiently, all of these failures created the conditions for this crisis. When people feel unheard, ignored, and steamrolled by their own government, they become vulnerable to extremist messaging. When they watch billions of pounds being spent on hotels, while hospital wait times extend to 15 to 20 hours, while pensioners struggle to heat their homes, while working-class communities see their public services deteriorate, of course they're angry.
Legal migration is good for the country and what it was built on, but the issue for us is illegal economic migration. 20 years ago, when migration was controlled, you could get, the hospital wait times were 3-4 hours. Now it's sort of 12, 15, 20 odd hours.
The Labour government's response has been mixed. They've made progress on closing hotels and reducing costs, but they've also introduced controversial new policies like doubling the qualifying period for refugee permanent residents from 5 to 10 years and suspending dedicated family reunification programs. And they've announced plans to repurpose military sites like Cameron Barracks in Scotland to house up to 10,000 asylum seekers, essentially creating detention camps. This has been criticized by both sides. Immigration restrictionists say it's still too generous, while refugee advocates call it inhumane. Meanwhile, small boat crossings continue, with over 28,000 arrivals in 2025, a 46% increase from 2024. The asylum backlog, while reduced by 24%, still stands at over 100,000 cases, and new asylum applications reached a record 111,084 in the year to June 2025. So what's the solution? That's the $1 trillion, or in this case, $15.3 billion question. Some argue for stricter border controls and faster deportations. Others call for more safe and legal routes for asylum seekers, better integration support, and increased processing capacity to clear the backlog quickly. Still others want international cooperation to address the root causes driving people to flee their homes in the first place. What's clear is that the current system satisfies virtually nobody. Hotels are expensive, inefficient, and unsustainable. Communities feel steamrolled and ignored. Asylum seekers live in limbo, unable to work or rebuild their lives. And far-right groups are exploiting every failure to recruit new members. The protests we've seen, from the violence in Rotherham to the chaos in Southampton, are symptoms of this deeper dysfunction. They're not going away until the underlying problems are addressed. The reality is far more complex and far more troubling than any sensational headline. Britain is experiencing a genuine crisis, not of immigration per se, but of trust, of governance, of social cohesion. The asylum hotels are merely the most visible symbol of that crisis.
While this year is on track to be the second highest year for small boat arrivals in the past 6 years, protests across the country continue to grow. With reports of rising costs and crime linked to migrant hotels, many local residents say they're running out of patience.
The question isn't whether these protests will continue, it's whether Britain can find a way forward that addresses legitimate concerns without giving in to hatred, that upholds humanitarian obligations without ignoring community impacts, that controls borders without losing its soul. Because if history teaches us anything, it's that societies fracture slowly at first, and then all at once. And right now, Britain is walking a razor's edge between democratic accountability and mob rule, between legitimate protest and organized violence, between national identity and nationalist extremism. The hotels may be temporary, but the divisions they've exposed, those might last for generations. Click on one of the cards on your screen to see more videos like this.